We've got some exciting features being added to the Lumix GH7, so I want to talk about those features and what they mean for this camera. But before we get started, like this video, hit the subscribe button, and consider joining the channel. Channel members get exclusive access to Filmmaker Alchemy, behind-the-scenes lessons and insights on the business of video production. Learn how to turn your content into gold. If you go over to Panasonic's website, you can find the new firmware for the Lumix GH7. It's actually, the website is like av.jpn. It's kind of a strange domain, but this is what it should look like. I'll put a link to it in the description so you can find it easily. Sometimes when you Google it, it's hard to find. You go to a blog and they've got it linked to just another blog article. So I'll link you directly to where you can actually download it. It'll look like this. And you see we've got this little orange tag for new for the GH7. If we click over to the download page, this is what that looks like, where you download that zip file, you extract the zip, you get a bin file, you'll see it right here. You put that bin file on a recently formatted SD card, so you don't want any other junk on there, just a clean, formatted in the camera SD card. Copy the bin file to the SD card, put in the camera, go to the wrench menu, go to the firmware, and there'll be an option to update, to activate the new firmware, which is this version 1.3 for the GH7. So GH7, kind of a newer camera, early on in the firmware. There's been some recent updates, but you can see they've been like relatively limited. This is the first kind of substantial update for the GH7, and I'm hopeful that they do even more with the GH7. A lot has been added to the S5 Mark II and the S5 Mark II X. GH7, by my accounts, by all accounts, I don't think is quite as popular as it ought to be. So that's why I wanted to do this video, just bring a little bit more attention to it, because it is a very, very powerful camera. If you have micro four thirds lenses, if you're in that system, the GH7 is a great option because it is incredibly powerful. Just maybe not as impressive as I think more people wanted, but there's quite a few people who are happy with the GH7. I do own one. I myself use it. Not all the time though. I've switched mostly to the S5 Mark II, and the GH7 is just another camera that I use when I need multicam. I have so many great micro four thirds lenses. There's a lot of reasons to be excited about the GH7. And now we get even more reasons. We've got multiple frame markers being added to the GH7. Basically, if you're not using this feature, you absolutely should. One of the main advantages of these Lumix cameras is that you can shoot open gate, meaning you can shoot horizontal and vertical content at the exact same time. These frame markers let you do that in a very easy to understand way, because it's a display on screen that shows you, here's your 16:9 crop, here's your 9:16 vertical crop. You can add another aspect ratio on that. You can do up to 3 with this new firmware, and you can even set them to be custom, so you can change what that aspect ratio is depending on your particular needs. It's a very, very intuitive, easy way to shoot horizontal, shoot vertical content, shoot square content all at the exact same time, and know your safe areas, ensuring that what you're filming is actually in frame and isn't, something that you need to spend a lot of time in post-production reframing to get the shot that you intended. So very, very powerful, especially if you're shooting open gate. But even if you're not, even if you're shooting traditional 16:9 4K footage, having a frame marker on screen for the exact what the 9:16 vertical slice is going to look like, or the 1:1 if you want a square version as well. It's really nice to have this in the camera because it's dynamic. It reacts, it's responsive to those changes. So you can switch your frame rate, you can switch your resolution, you can switch your aspect ratio, open gate, 16:9. All of those changes you make, those frame markers dynamically respond in a way that's appropriate. So you're always getting that kind of visual cue of what's in frame versus what's out. Very, very helpful. What's missing from this list that the S5 Mark II users got is crop zoom and hybrid zoom. Maybe those aren't possible on the GH7 for whatever resolution limitation, but I don't think that's true. I believe the resolution is, plenty to incorporate some kind of hybrid zoom, crop zoom feature. So maybe that's still coming to the GH7, but it is notable that this big firmware release that Panasonic put out for these Lumix cameras, for the S5 Mark II, for the GH7, they're not exactly identical. The S5 Mark II users are getting extra stuff that the GH7 people don't have currently, but maybe that comes in 1.4 or 1.5, hopefully, to take full advantage of those amazing cool features like hybrid zoom. If you don't know about it, check it out. It's really, really cool. Kind of extends the focal range of your lens. So the wide end is the wide end, but as you zoom in, it's also cropping into the sensor in real time to kind of give you more reach with those zoom lenses, all right on the lens. There's no buttons, there's no dials. It's just, it happens intuitively and seamlessly. I think it's a very, very cool feature that I'd like to see more of. On the GH7, we get that it's compatible to the recording format MP4 Lite. The option for the low bitrate video format MP4 Lite can now be selected for 3.8K or 30 frames, 50 megabits a second. Nice to have if you need, a lighter weight 4K video file that's not the massive, 400 megabit crazy data sizes that we can get nowadays sometimes. So if you're trying to lower your file size, lower your footprint, and you don't need that ultimate image quality, having some lighter weight codecs is always nice to have. We also get that it's compatible with the new features in the Lumix smartphone app, the Lumix Lab app. If you've used Lumix for a while, you'll know there's a Lumix Sync app that has quite a few features, basically all of them that I can think of, except for real-time LUT and some of the newer stuff that the Lumix Lab app was developed to do. But now the Lumix Lab app is getting updated to allow remote shooting, shutter remote control, wireless IP streaming, and transferring images select on the camera. So some additional functionality there on the smartphone app side of things, which is nice. This is good for maybe like event coverage when you're just trying to like shoot something real quick, send the photos to a smartphone to get posted on social media in more of kind of a real-time fashion. That's nice to have if you can get it working, but I always end up running into issues with the Wi-Fi and the signal and having to reconnect and enter the password and clear the cache. And there's always so much difficulty there that it's often not been worth the hassle. But if you can get it working, and if this actually works the way they say, and it's a little bit more stable, a little bit more robust, I would gladly take it because it's a good feature to have if you need it. It does add some additional functionality and kind of that like the time-sensitive content you might be shooting when it comes to photography. Just send it right to your smartphone, get it posted. A lot of people like that, especially clients, depending on the project. The fourth bullet point, feature changes due to security enhancements. This is where people are maybe getting a little upset. When directly connecting the camera and smartphone via Wi-Fi, the connection has been changed to always require password authentication. We've also got the TKIP encryption method is no longer supported when connecting to Wi-Fi via an access point. The no encryption option in network authentication is no longer supported when connecting to Wi-Fi via an access point. The wired LAN streaming feature, the RTP, RTSP, has been removed. I believe that was also removed for the S5 Mark II X. You can't do that. I don't think you ever could do that on the S5 Mark II, but on the S5 Mark II X you could, and it's been removed. And then same thing with GH7, they removed it. And the image transfer feature to PC via Wi-Fi has also been removed for only European and Ukrainian models. The streaming feature via RTMP has been removed, only European and Ukrainian models. And number 5, we also get these other improvements for operational stability. Nothing to really talk about there. So stuff is being removed. If any of these features are meaningful to you, if you're using them, don't update your firmware because you're going to lose them, especially if you got a European model or a Ukrainian model GH7, or if you have some of these other, more specific things like it's always going to require you to do password authentication now for the Wi-Fi menu. They say this is for security. I don't know the exact reason. I think it's unfortunate anytime a camera is sold with particular features that then get removed after the fact. Because, you'd almost wonder like, well, if you bought it for that particular feature, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. I don't know how niche or fringe these uses are. They're things I don't use, so I can't really speak to it all that well, other than I do sympathize if you bought a GH7 to do, wired LAN streaming via RTP, RTSP, and that's been removed. Like if you bought the camera for that feature and now that's gone, I would definitely reach out to Panasonic and make some noise if you actually need that feature. Maybe there's something they can do with like a refund reimbursement. I don't know. But if you bought a camera for a particular feature and that's no longer there, I think that's a valid complaint, a valid criticism that you should actively, be your own advocate, reach out, ask for support, figure out a solution, especially if they're updating the firmware to give you more features that you also probably want, but removing things along the way. In most of those cases, you might be past the return window. Like if you bought the camera when it came out 6 months ago, you're probably past the return window for most places. So I would, be frustrated if that got removed and it was something I actually used. Like imagine they're like, hey, you can't do open gate anymore. We remove that feature. I would make some serious noise. I'd be pretty upset. These features maybe only impact less than 1% of the users. I don't think there's that many GH7 users out there anyway, so I would be curious if this affects you directly. Leave a comment on this video explaining how and why you're using these features that are being removed and why you need them. Don't just make up like, well, other people could use them for, I want to know the people who are actually doing it, because you'll see that on Reddit or other community forums where people will complain on behalf of someone else, some imaginary person they're inventing in their mind. Well, maybe there's people out there who need this. No, if this actually affects you and you're using it for some business or personal function, you want that feature and it's being removed. I would love to hear about how it's affected you personally, not just some random person or imaginary person you make up in your mind. So I think it's unfortunate. They are saying it's for security reasons. I would like a little bit more explanation of what those security reasons are. Is there some kind of hack, exploit? Is this actually risky, or is this just kind of a covering their liability because they don't know? I don't know, and I would like a little bit more clarification on it, because again, to sell a camera with features and then to take them away, it's never going to be a good feeling. That's going to be pretty painful. So there ought to be a very good reason for it. It should be explained a little bit more than what's in this firmware update. But you let me know if that's impacted you directly. Other than that, I think it's a nice firmware update. It's not quite as exciting as what the S5 Mark II gets in terms of hybrid zoom and crop zoom, but it is decent. It's nice to see that the GH7 is being supported, because it truly is probably my favorite Micro Four Thirds camera. We got what we always wanted: good, reliable autofocus in video, continuous autofocus in video with some really nice subject tracking. We've got expanded, like better dynamic range. You know, the GH6 had the dynamic range boost, but it was kind of crippled by having to operate at ISO 2000 if you're shooting vlog. Now we get that, dynamic range boost across all ISO values. So the GH7 is a very worthy camera. I think probably just overpriced compared to what else is out there in the market, considering how cheap those full frame cameras are these days. So if you need a Micro Four Thirds camera, I highly recommend the GH7, but it might be, too little too late in a world that's moved towards full frame, where those sensors in certain cameras are very, very cheap. You can get an S9 for around $1,000. It's not a proper, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles of a GH7, but if you need something just to record some video, and you can do a full frame S9 for $1,000 versus like $2,200 for a GH7, it's hard to justify that, even considering all the amazing video features that the GH7 has. I think Micro Four Thirds, to compete, to stay relevant for the future, really needs to focus on that value and the size. A smaller sensor should be cheaper, and the camera should be more compact. I don't think there's any reason why a bigger sensor could be cheaper and smaller for the camera. It's just kind of like, what's the point of Micro Four Thirds at that point in time? Yes, it gives you extended reach if you're doing any kind of wildlife, you want super long telephoto, but there's a lot of downsides to Micro Four Thirds as well, in terms of just like the overall noise and the image quality. Like, I like Micro Four Thirds. I actually love Micro Four Thirds. I've been shooting with it for so long. Some of the best lenses are for Micro Four Thirds. Some of the best features were for Micro Four Thirds. But all those features have made their way to full frame as well. And so now you're wondering, like, what's the advantage? What's the competitive point of Micro Four Thirds? Why would I choose a smaller sensor size when, all things considered, they're more or less equivalent these days? Is it faster readouts? Is it more dynamic range? Is it better color? There's things that they could hype up that they could do, but it just doesn't seem that the GH7 made the splash, made the waves as something like a GH5, which was a powerhouse and still is to this day. So many amazing features on the GH5, but a lot of those features have become embraced across all the brands, all the sensor sizes. So I'm kind of curious to see what happens with if we ever get a GH8, how that would remain relevant, how it would still differentiate itself. I'm going to keep my Micro Four Thirds glass for quite a while, because I love those lenses and I love the GH7, but I can understand why it might not be the most exciting camera these days, considering there's so many other good options out there, even from Lumix themselves. And maybe that's what they want. Maybe they want everyone to shift to the S full frame cameras. I don't know what their brand or their marketing or their business strategy is, but I think that it's nice to see firmware support for these cameras. There's plenty of other camera brands and manufacturers that, they'll release firmware that does basically nothing other than, ruin the functionality of the camera. I've definitely been through that whole experience. Not with Lumix, with other brands where you go update the firmware and you go, wow, I got basically nothing, and now this thing is broken. Not very fun to deal with, but I'm glad to see that these Lumix cameras are getting the support they deserve. And I would, as a B camera, the GH7 is awesome. Great backup, great additional camera, especially if you have all those micro Four Thirds lenses anyway. If you can find a GH7 at a price point that fits your budget, highly recommend it. And it's nice to see that it's getting the support it deserves.